You think it's just a parking dispute? That's what I thought until my HOA president blocked my car, threatened to tow it, and called the cops on me. She didn't know I was a federal officer. And worse for her, she didn't realize her fake rules were about to unravel a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. What began with one arrogant demand in my driveway turned into the biggest HOA corruption case my state had ever seen. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday afternoon. I had planned nothing more ambitious than walking to my car, grabbing my laptop, and finishing up some reports before dinner. The sun was hot but pleasant, the kind of late summer warmth that makes the air shimmer above the asphalt. Kids were riding bikes in the cul-de-sac, sprinklers hissed over manicured lawns, and everything about the neighborhood looked calm except for the woman standing directly in front of my car. She was dressed in a bright pastel suit, the kind of color choice that screamed authority but landed somewhere closer to theater, with a clipboard tucked under one arm and a cell phone in her hand. She planted herself between me and my Honda Civic like a bouncer guarding the gates of heaven. "This vehicle," she announced loudly enough for the entire block to hear, "is in violation of HOA Regulation 47B, subsection 3 regarding weekend parking proximity to community mailbox access." I froze halfway to the car, more baffled than angry. Regulation 47B, subsection 3. I'd been in this neighborhood for 3 years and never once heard of such a rule. Around us, a few neighbors peeked out from their porches and curtains, the way people do when they sense a show about to begin. I crossed my arms and leaned against the mailbox. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "I'm parked in a legal public parking spot. The HOA has no jurisdiction here." Her eyes narrowed like I had just spat in her lemonade. "You either move this car or I'll have it forcibly removed. You can't just park wherever you want. This is our community." It was a performance. Really. Her voice carried that peculiar frequency, half shrill, half commanding, that HOA bullies seemed to perfect over years of petty enforcement. I could see she relished the crowd forming, as if their quiet stares were validation of her power. But 15 years of working in federal service had taught me 2 things. First, always keep your cool. Second, always document everything. Without a word, I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit record. Virginia's one-party consent law made it perfectly legal, and I had a hunch this performance would be worth saving. Karen's face flushed an angry shade of red. "Don't you dare record me. I am the president of this homeowners association, and you will respect my authority." Respect, I thought, was earned, not demanded. "If you're confident in your authority," I replied calmly, "then you won't mind this conversation being preserved." Her jaw tightened. She stepped closer, pointing a trembling finger at my windshield. "You're trespassing. Move the car voluntarily, or I'll have you arrested. You think I'm bluffing? Watch me." And just like that, she dialed 911. The absurdity of it all nearly made me laugh. Calling the police because I parked on a public street. Still, I let her talk, my phone still recording, while I leaned casually against the car. Neighbors whispered among themselves, some clearly entertained, others looking uncomfortable. The scent of fresh mulch mixed with chlorine from the nearby pool, but all anyone could smell was drama. As she ranted into the phone, I slipped my wallet from my pocket. "Before you make any calls, you might regret," I said, holding it open so the sunlight caught the badge inside. "You should know who you're talking to." Her eyes flicked downward, reading the words "Federal Interior Chief" printed in clean government typography. I saw the change immediately, smug certainty collapsing into startled confusion. For a split second, I thought she might back down, but arrogance rarely folds so easily. "I don't care if you're the President of the United States," she snapped, her voice cracking higher. "This is private property, and I have jurisdiction here. The police will back me up." Her desperation was showing now, like someone marching confidently toward a cliff while pretending not to see the edge. Within minutes, the faint wail of sirens cut through the suburban calm. Neighbors leaned further out of their doorways. Some even pulled out lawn chairs. Nothing spices up a quiet weekend like the prospect of watching a federal officer get arrested over a parking dispute. Karen's smile returned as flashing lights rounded the corner. She smoothed her blazer as if preparing for her victory speech. "That'll be the police," she said triumphantly. We'll see what they say about your badge when they're hauling you off my property. I almost pitied her. Almost. The patrol car slowed to a stop beside us. Out stepped Detective Sarah Morrison, a woman in her 30s with the kind of calm authority you can't fake. She adjusted her belt, glanced around at the gathered crowd, and asked in a steady voice, "What seems to be the problem here?" Karen pounced, launching into her performance with the confidence of a Broadway actress. She rattled off the fake regulation again, waving toward my car, and declared that I was in direct violation of HOA rules and needed to be removed. I waited patiently, letting her dig her hole deeper. When she finally paused for breath, I stepped forward and handed Morrison my identification. "Detective, my name is Elias Monroe. I'm a federal interior chief. My car is legally parked on a public street. Mrs. Jennings," I gestured toward Karen without looking at her, "has threatened to have me arrested and towed for refusing to move." The silence was exquisite. Morrison studied my ID carefully, her brows lifting slightly. She looked from me to Karen and then back again. The weight of the moment shifted palpably. Behind us, a voice rose timidly. Mrs. Roberts, an older neighbor clutching her sweater, stepped forward. "Officer," she said softly but firmly. This isn't the first time she's done this. She's been creative with the rules for quite some time. Her words landed like stones dropped into still water, rippling through the crowd. Suddenly, what looked like a petty squabble took on a darker edge. Morrison's face tightened as she considered the implications. Karen sputtered, her confidence faltering as the detective turned toward her. "Ma'am, are you aware this is a public street? HOA regulations don't extend here." The pastel queen's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again with less force. I was only trying to protect community standards." But the murmurs among neighbors had changed. What began as entertainment was morphing into something else, a reckoning. And as I stood there, calm badge in hand, I realized that my quiet Sunday was over. What I thought was just a petty parking dispute was the opening act of a much bigger story. Detective Morrison stood between us, the sunlight glinting off the hood of her patrol car. She had the kind of expression that betrayed nothing professional neutrality, as if she'd handled hundreds of neighborhood quarrels just like this. But the way her eyes lingered on my federal badge told me she understood this wasn't the usual noise complaint. "All right," she said evenly. "Why don't we go one at a time?" "Ma'am," she gestured at Karen, who was practically vibrating with pent-up outrage. "You first. Tell me exactly what the issue is." Karen seized the moment, lifting her chin like a queen about to deliver judgment. "This man," she declared, stabbing her finger toward me, "has parked in violation of our HOA's regulations. Regulation 47B, subsection 3 to be exact. Cars are not permitted within 30 feet of the mailbox cluster on weekends. And this individual thinks he's above the law." The crowd murmured approvingly, though whether they actually believed her or were simply enjoying the spectacle, I couldn't tell. She had a knack for performance. I'd give her that. Even her posture, one hand clutching her clipboard, the other raised as if conducting an orchestra of neighborhood gossip, commanded attention. I let her finish, then stepped forward with deliberate calm. "Detective, my name is Elias Monroe. I am a federal interior chief. I parked my car in a legal, public space to retrieve some work materials. HOA regulations, real or imaginary, don't apply to public streets." I held up my phone, its screen still glowing from the recording app. Virginia law allows me to record interactions like this. I thought it might be wise, considering Mrs. Jennings here threatened to have me arrested and my car forcibly towed. Detective Morrison took the phone, glanced at the screen, and then back at me. "Public street. You said yes, ma'am. City property." "Not HOA jurisdiction." Her eyes shifted toward Karen. "Is that true?" Karen faltered. I saw it the first crack in her pastel armor. She licked her lips, tried to rally. "This neighborhood is private. Our HOA has oversight of all property within community boundaries. He has no right." But Morrison cut her off with the kind of gentle firmness only an experienced officer can muster. "Ma'am, HOA authority ends where public property begins. Unless your association owns this street, which, according to county records, it doesn't. You can't dictate who parks here. The silence that followed was heavy. Neighbors exchanged glances. Someone stifled a laugh. Karen's face darkened. That's not the point. This man is disruptive. He refuses to comply with our standards. Mrs. Jennings, Morrison said, her patience thinning. The point is whether he violated the law. And from what I can see, he hasn't. For a brief moment, Karen looked like a balloon that had lost its helium. Her shoulders sagged, her lips tightened, and her gaze darted around as if searching for someone, anyone, to back her up. But support was evaporating. That's when Mrs. Roberts, the elderly neighbor who had spoken earlier, stepped forward again. She clutched the edge of her cardigan like a shield, but spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. Officer, this isn't the first time she's done this. Last spring, she had the Thompsons written up for leaving their car in their own driveway overnight, and the Nakamuras, before they moved, she fined them for having their trash cans out 30 minutes too early. She uses these so-called rules to push people around. The crowd reacted audibly now, nodding, whispering, recalling their own experiences. Morrison tilted her head, her expression sharpening. This wasn't just one neighborly spat, it was a pattern. Karen bristled. These people are liars, they just don't like accountability. Someone has to maintain order around here, and if I don't do it, who will? Do you want this neighborhood to fall into chaos? I couldn't resist. Chaos. Mrs. Jennings. For parking a Honda Civic on a Sunday afternoon, a ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Karen's cheeks burned crimson. Detective Morrison folded her arms. I think I've heard enough. Mr. Monroe, you're free to go. Your vehicle is legally parked. Mrs. Jennings, I'd advise you to review the scope of your HOA authority before making threats about arrests and towing. You do not have jurisdiction on public property. Karen's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping on dry land. But no sound came out. The patrol car lights flicked off, the siren gone silent, and the performance ended not with applause but with neighbors dispersing in small, murmuring groups. Some shook their heads. Others cast Karen glances of pity or disdain. As I turned to leave, I caught Morrison's eye. She leaned closer, her voice low enough only I could hear. You handled that well, but be careful. People like her don't usually stop after one failed attempt. They escalate. I nodded, the weight of her words settling into my chest. At home, later that evening, I couldn't shake the scene from my mind. The way Karen had rattled off that fake regulation, as if it were gospel. The way the crowd had nearly believed her until facts intervened. It wasn't just arrogance, it was confidence born from practice. I opened my laptop and typed Willow Creek HOA bylaws into the Virginia State Corporations Commission database. Within minutes, the documents appeared scanned pages of legalese outlining community responsibilities and restrictions. I scrolled, searching for Regulation 47B, subsection 3. Nothing. I searched for weekend parking rules. Again, nothing. Instead, the bylaws contained ordinary clauses: maintain your lawn, keep trash bins out of sight, architectural reviews for exterior changes. Boring, predictable, and nothing close to what Karen had shouted in the street. My pulse quickened. She had invented the rule, fabricated it from thin air, counting on the fact that no one would bother to check. But I wasn't just anyone. 15 years of government service had trained me to read between lines, to see where power is claimed versus where it's actually granted. And what I saw was a fraud in broad daylight. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. The detective was right. This wasn't over. People like Karen don't stop when they're caught lying. They just get craftier. As if on cue, my phone buzzed on the desk. An unknown number. One message. You should drop this before it gets complicated. Some things are better left alone. The words glowed on my screen, sharp and cold. I stared at them for a long moment, then took a screenshot. If Karen or whoever was protecting her thought intimidation would silence me, they didn't understand who they were dealing with. What had begun as a parking spat was about to turn into something much larger. And for the first time that day, I realized I wasn't dealing with a neighborhood nuisance. I was staring at the edges of something that smelled a lot like corruption. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's face, her smug certainty, the way she'd recited those made-up rules like scripture. I'd worked long enough in government to recognize when someone wasn't just mistaken, but was deliberately manufacturing authority. And if she was willing to invent a Regulation 47B on the spot, what else was she hiding? By morning, curiosity had turned into obsession. I sat down with a mug of black coffee and opened my laptop again. The Virginia State Corporation Commission's website was my starting point. Willow Creek HOA had been incorporated 15 years ago, and their filings were all public record. With a few clicks, I downloaded their annual financial statements. That's when the numbers punched me in the gut. In just 2 years, the association's administrative fees had doubled from $14,000 to nearly $30,000 annually. For a neighborhood of only 52 homes, that was outrageous. And it didn't stop there. Line after line of vague expenses jumped out: consulting services, management oversight, community improvement studies. None of it detailed, no invoices attached, just large, round numbers that smelled of laziness or worse, fraud. One name appeared repeatedly: Jennings Consulting, LLC. My eyes narrowed. Jennings, as in Karen Jennings, the president of the HOA. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was paying herself with HOA funds under the guise of consulting. I scrolled further, heat rising in my chest. The payments to Jennings Consulting totaled more than $40,000 in the past 2 years alone, for services no one in the neighborhood had ever seen. If this were any other government contract, it would be an automatic red flag. In the private world of an HOA, it might have gone unnoticed until now. My thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. I checked the peephole, and my stomach tightened. Mrs. Roberts stood on my porch, clutching something small in her hand, her eyes darting nervously up and down the street. I opened the door quickly. "Come inside." She slipped past me, glancing behind her before I closed the door. Only when the deadbolt clicked did she seem to breathe again. "I didn't mean to intrude," she whispered, "but after what happened yesterday, I think you need to hear this." She placed a small handheld recorder on my coffee table, one of those cheap devices students use to capture lectures. She pressed play. Karen's voice filled my living room, shrill but commanding. "The increase is necessary for enhanced community services. The board has approved it unanimously." Another voice, timid, spoke up on the recording. "But we don't have a quorum. Half the board isn't present. And we haven't seen the budget breakdown." Karen cut them off with ice in her tone. "I said the board approved it. If anyone has an issue, I can order compliance reviews on your property. We'll see how well your mailbox color holds up against Regulation 12C. Mrs. Roberts paused the recording. Her eyes filled with both fear and resolve. She's been doing this for years, threatening people, inventing violations. My husband wanted to fight it, but after Karen's husband got his job with the county zoning office, every time we spoke up, we found notices taped to our door grass too long, porch light too dim, mailbox not up to standard. We were afraid of losing our home. I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled. This wasn't just pettiness. This was systematic intimidation, a pattern of manufactured rules to cover up financial theft. How many others, I asked quietly. Mrs. Roberts' lips trembled. The Nakamuras before they moved, the young couple on Elm Street, even the Thompsons. People either pay the fines or sell and leave. That's why half this neighborhood turns over every 3 years. She pushes them out. I scribbled notes furiously, my mind racing. If Karen was using her HOA presidency as a personal ATM and her husband's zoning position to shield her, this wasn't neighborhood drama anymore. This was corruption. The recorder clicked off, and Mrs. Roberts looked at me with pleading eyes. "You're a federal officer. Can't you stop her?" Her words carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Normally, federal jurisdiction wouldn't touch something like an HOA squabble, but threats, fraudulent filings, misused funds, intimidation, those were different beasts. And the fact that Karen had already threatened me made it personal. "I can't promise an overnight fix," I said, But I can promise you this, I'll document everything. And when we move, we'll move properly. No shortcuts. Mrs. Roberts nodded, her shoulders sagging with a mixture of relief and fear. Be careful, Mr. Monroe. She won't go down quietly. After she left, I opened a fresh file on my laptop and labeled it Willow Creek Investigation. Into it went screenshots of HOA filings, photographs of Karen's fake citations, and now Mrs. Roberts' recording. The file was already thickening, taking on the shape of a case I'd never intended to build. Hours passed. Coffee turned cold. My desk filled with sticky notes and cross-referenced links between county contracts and HOA payments. Jennings Consulting wasn't registered with the Better Business Bureau. It had no employees, no office, no business license, just a P.O. box that traced directly back to Karen's home address. It was fraud in the plainest terms I'd ever seen. Then my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number as last night. Drop this. Last warning. No name. No punctuation. Just 3 words, pulsing on my screen like a dare. Instead of fear, I felt adrenaline. I screenshotted the text, emailed it to myself, and added it to the folder. Threatening a federal officer, even indirectly, was a felony in itself. Whoever sent that message just handed me more leverage. I leaned back, rubbed my temples, and let the truth sink in. This wasn't about a car anymore. Karen had built a small empire on intimidation and fake authority, and she'd been looting the HOA treasury for years while everyone else looked the other way. The crowd yesterday had seen a spectacle. I'd seen the mask slip, and now, for the first time, I realized my Sunday skirmish wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a war. The following morning, I woke up with a gnawing sense that the neighborhood I thought I knew had been hiding in plain sight all along. Willow Creek looked like any other middle-class suburban community, 2-story homes with vinyl siding, neatly trimmed lawns, kids' bikes leaning against garage doors. But beneath the illusion of order, something rotten was festering, and I had just peeled back the first layer. After my encounter with Mrs. Roberts, I couldn't shake the image of Karen's smug face when she'd cited those fake rules. She had the confidence of someone who knew she was untouchable. That bothered me more than the fraud itself. In my line of work, the truly dangerous people weren't the petty crooks. They were the ones who believed the system could never touch them. I decided to dig deeper. I logged into the county's business registry, cross-referencing every vendor the HOA had paid in the last 5 years. Most were legitimate landscaping services, pool maintenance, snow removal contracts, but scattered among them were odd entries Jennings Consulting, Willowbrook Management Partners, and a company called Tri-County Development Advisors. None had physical offices. 2 were registered to P.O. boxes, and 1, Jennings Consulting, was tied directly to Karen's home address. More troubling, the zoning records showed a pattern. Each time Karen's husband, Robert Jennings, approved a zoning variance or fast-tracked a permit, the HOA's expenses ballooned. It was like watching gears in a machine turn together. He controlled what got built in the county. She controlled who paid and who left. And together, they controlled the flow of money. I printed the documents and laid them out across my dining table. The picture forming was clear. Karen wasn't just a neighborhood tyrant. She was running a miniature racket. Inflated consulting contracts funneled HOA money into her pocket. Manufactured fines and threats pushed families out, lowering resistance, and Robert's zoning influence insulated them from scrutiny. At that moment, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number, same as before. Stop digging or you'll regret it. I stared at the message, jaw tightening. They were watching me. Either Karen herself or someone in her orbit knew I was onto them. But instead of fear, the message filled me with resolve. If they wanted me to stop, it meant I was on the right track. Later that afternoon, as I sifted through more records, the doorbell rang. Standing there was a man in his late 40s, dressed in work clothes, eyes darting nervously. He introduced himself as Tom Henderson, a former resident. I heard about what happened. He said in a low voice, "Word gets around. You stood up to her, didn't you? I invited him in, and over a cup of coffee, he told me his story. My wife and I lived here for 8 years. He began. hands clasped tightly. 3 years ago, Karen fined us for having the wrong shade of curtains. Curtains, for God's sake. Then came notices about our mailbox, our grass, even how long my truck sat in the driveway. When I refused to pay, she threatened legal action, said she had the authority to put a lien on our home. He shook his head, bitterness etched in his features. We finally sold and moved, lost money in the process. But it was that or go bankrupt fighting her. She uses fear like a weapon. I wrote everything down, adding his account to my growing file. That made 3 families Roberts, the Nakamuras, and now Henderson, who had independently confirmed Karen's reign of intimidation. When he left, I sat in silence for a long time. This wasn't neighborhood pettiness anymore. It was organized abuse of power, sustained by fear and silence. And now, by pure chance, it had collided with someone who wasn't willing to be intimidated. By evening, I knew what I had to do. I gathered all my evidence, financial discrepancies, recordings, text threats, witness statements, and organized them into a digital dossier. Then I drafted a report careful to outline the legal violations: fraud, misuse of funds, abuse of authority, potential corruption tied to county zoning. I didn't send it yet. Not to the FBI, not to state officials, not until I had one more piece of evidence, the smoking gun. And as if fate had been listening, that piece fell right into my lap. Mrs. Roberts returned the next day, this time with a folder in hand. "I wasn't sure if I should give you this," she admitted, "but I can't keep it to myself anymore." Inside were minutes from the last HOA board meeting. Only they weren't real minutes, they were fabrications. Handwritten notes showed the actual meeting had lacked a quorum. Yet the official version, typed up and distributed to residents, claimed unanimous approval for a 25% increase in HOA dues. Even worse, attached to the minutes was a contract Willow Creek HOA agreeing to pay Jennings Consulting an additional $15,000 for strategic oversight. That was it. Proof of procedural fraud and financial self-dealing. I looked at Mrs. Roberts, who seemed both terrified and relieved. "Do you realize what this means?" I asked. She nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. "It means she's finally going to get what she deserves." I scanned the documents, uploaded them into my growing file, and sat back in my chair. The case was ready. Karen thought she was untouchable, that no one would challenge her authority. But soon, she would discover she had picked the wrong neighbor to bully. That night, I drafted a cover letter addressed to the Virginia State Attorney General's office. I knew they handled public corruption cases, especially when they involve misuse of funds and abuse of legal authority. This wasn't just an HOA problem anymore, it was state business. Before I shut my laptop, I checked my phone one last time. Another message had arrived. "Last chance. Walk away." I smiled grimly and snapped a screenshot. Then I whispered to myself, "I don't walk away." The stage was set. What had started with a ridiculous parking dispute was about to expose a network of fraud, intimidation, and corruption. And Karen Jennings was about to learn that her pastel blazers and fake regulations couldn't shield her from the truth. I drove into Richmond the next morning with a leather folder full of documents on the passenger seat. The state attorney general's office wasn't my first choice, but it was the right one. I'd debated going straight to the FBI, but without clear interstate connections, this was still a state-level matter. Besides, as a federal officer, I understood jurisdictional boundaries better than most. Start small, start local, and build. The building itself loomed like something out of a civics textbook: gray granite, tall columns, an intimidating reminder that the rule of law wasn't just an idea, but a place where real people worked. I checked in at the front desk, introduced myself by name and title, and within minutes found myself sitting across from Assistant Attorney General Patricia Wells. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of composure that comes from prosecuting corruption cases where one misstep could collapse months of work. She listened quietly as I laid out the folder on the table between us: financial records, fraudulent contracts, fabricated minutes, threatening texts, and Mrs. Roberts' recording. By the time I finished speaking, she had steepled her fingers and leaned forward. "Mr. Monroe," she said evenly, "what you've brought me isn't a neighborhood dispute. It's the skeleton of a corruption case. And if even half of this checks out, it goes far beyond HOA mismanagement. I nodded. Karen Jennings has been using her HOA presidency to funnel money into her own company. She manufactures rules to intimidate residents, forces people out, and hides behind her husband's county zoning position to avoid oversight. That's not a spat between neighbors. That's abuse of power for financial gain. Wells flipped through the folder, pausing at the Jennings consulting contract. This company is registered at her home address. Yes, no employees, no license. It exists for one purpose: to bleed the HOA dry. Her lips tightened. We'll need to subpoena bank records, but if the payments line up, that's fraud. And given her husband's position, we may be looking at conflict of interest, maybe even conspiracy. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of vindication. Someone with authority believed me. But before relief could settle in, Wells raised a finger. Be careful. People like this don't go quietly. If she feels threatened, she may try to discredit you. I almost laughed. She already has. She called the police on me for parking my car. Wells's brow arched. Then she's bolder than most. All right, here's what we'll do. I'll open a preliminary inquiry. That protects you legally as a cooperating witness and allows my office to start pulling records. But you need to keep documenting everything. If she contacts you again, texts, calls, anything, save it. Every piece matters. I agreed, left the building, and drove home with a mix of satisfaction and unease. The ball was rolling now, and once it rolled, it wouldn't stop until someone was crushed under it. That evening, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. A new message from the same unknown number. Heard you went to Richmond? Wrong move. This time, I forwarded the text straight to Wells's office. Within minutes, I got a call from one of her investigators. Mr. Monroe, that message just elevated your case. Threatening a federal officer cooperating with a state investigation qualifies as obstruction. We'll trace the number. The next day, Detective Morrison, the same officer who'd responded to Karen's original 911 stunt, showed up at my door in plain clothes. She carried a manila envelope. I was asked to deliver this personally, she said, handing it to me. And off the record, keep your head down. Jennings has friends in places you don't expect. Inside the envelope were copies of subpoenas, already filed bank records for Jennings Consulting, county zoning approvals tied to Robert Jennings, and HOA financial accounts. Things were moving fast, faster than I'd imagined. But Karen was moving too. Word spread around Willow Creek like wildfire. Neighbors whispered that I was trying to take down the HOA. Flyers appeared on light poles claiming I was abusing my federal position to bully a dedicated community leader. The language reeked of Karen's hand. She was trying to turn the neighborhood against me. One evening, as I stepped outside to grab my mail, I caught two men in suits standing near the end of the block. They weren't from around here. I knew every face in this neighborhood. They pretended to chat casually, but their eyes tracked me. When I approached, they turned and walked briskly away. That night, another message came, back off, or we'll make this personal. I sat at my desk, staring at the glowing screen, then at the thickening folder of evidence. Karen's arrogance was her downfall. Every threat she sent, every flyer she printed, every fabricated rule, it all became more rope to hang herself with. But it wasn't just her anymore. The men in suits told me this was bigger. This was coordinated. 2 days later, Wells called again. Her voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. Mr. Monroe, we pulled bank records. Jennings Consulting has received over $200,000 in payments, not just from your HOA, but from 3 others in the county, all for consulting services. And we found zoning variances approved by Robert Jennings directly benefiting board members who signed off on those contracts. I felt my stomach drop. So, it's not just Willow Creek. No, she said grimly. It's a network. And it looks like they've been running it for years. The room seemed colder as her words sank in. What started as Karen yelling about a parking space had spiraled into something far more sinister. This wasn't a suburban squabble, it was organized corruption, hidden beneath the veneer of HOA governance. And now I was standing at the center of it. That night, As I sat in my office staring at the stacks of documents, I realized there was no turning back. I wasn't just documenting a bully anymore. I was holding evidence of a criminal enterprise. And Karen Jennings, the self-proclaimed queen of Willow Creek, had no idea that her fabricated rules and pastel power plays had just triggered an investigation that could bring her entire empire crashing down. By the time the weekend rolled around, my quiet suburban street felt less like a neighborhood and more like the staging ground for a covert operation. Strange cars idled longer than usual at the corner. Unfamiliar faces appeared at the grocery store, eyes lingering on me a second too long. It was the kind of surveillance I'd learned to recognize after years in federal service. But this time, it wasn't sanctioned by any agency. It was intimidation, plain and simple. On Sunday evening, I received the call that confirmed everything. It wasn't from Wells at the Attorney General's office, but from someone higher up, Special Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI Public Corruption Unit. Her voice carried clipped efficiency, the tone of someone who never wasted a syllable. "Mr. Monroe, your name came across my desk today," she said. "The Attorney General forwarded your materials to us. What you've uncovered doesn't stop at the county line. We've been building a federal case for 8 months, multi-state HOA fraud, shell companies, money laundering. Your evidence provides the missing link." Her words landed heavy. "Are you saying Karen Jennings is part of something bigger?" "Much bigger," Torres replied. "She's not just a neighborhood tyrant. She's a coordinator. Her consulting company has been receiving payments from HOAs across Virginia and into Maryland. The sums total over $2 million in the last 3 years. We believe she's laundering funds through real estate deals facilitated by her husband's zoning office. $2 million. I sat back in my chair, stunned. What had started as a petty parking dispute had opened the door to a multi-state corruption case. "We need your cooperation," Torres continued. "But understand this, if you stay involved, you'll be stepping into a federal investigation that could get dangerous. These people aren't just filing fake HOA minutes anymore. They have lawyers, connections, and resources. We've already seen attempts at witness intimidation. That includes you." I glanced at my phone, still holding the last anonymous threat. "They've already tried." "Then you understand the stakes," she said. "We'll set you up with secure communication channels. But for now, keep doing what you're doing. Document everything. Don't confront her directly. We're watching." The line went dead, and I sat in silence, staring at the darkened window. The reflection staring back at me wasn't just a federal officer anymore. It was a man who had stumbled into the center of a storm. The next morning, the media caught wind. A local paper ran a piece, "Neighborhood Parking Dispute Escalates into Legal Drama." The article painted Karen as a dedicated community leader under attack by a powerful federal official. It had her fingerprints all over it. She was playing the victim card, and she was good at it. By midweek, television crews were parked on the corner. Reporters knocked on my door, shoving microphones in my face. "Mr. Monroe, are you abusing your federal position to bully your HOA president? Did you threaten Mrs. Jennings with prosecution?" I refused to comment. But the smear campaign was working. Neighbors I'd spoken with just days before now avoided eye contact. Flyers appeared in mailboxes accusing me of trying to bankrupt the community with legal battles. It was psychological warfare, and Karen was pulling every string she had. But she didn't know I was already 3 steps ahead. Late that Thursday night, I received another secure call from Torres. "We intercepted communications from Jennings. She's been meeting with associates in Maryland. We believe she's trying to move assets and destroy evidence. But in doing so, she confirmed her link to the larger network." "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "It means you're officially part of a federal case now. You'll be listed as a cooperating witness under protective monitoring. But it also means you're a target. She knows you're the reason this blew up." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. This one was different. It wasn't a warning. It was a photo. My house, taken from across the street. The timestamp showed it had been snapped less than an hour earlier. I forwarded it to Torres immediately. Within minutes, 2 black SUVs rolled into the neighborhood and parked discreetly nearby. I had federal protection now, but instead of feeling safer, I felt the gravity of the fight I was in. The following day, Wells called me back to her office. She had a stack of papers thicker than a phone book waiting. We've traced the consulting payments. Jennings Consulting has been pulling money from at least 5 HOAs across 2 counties. And thanks to the FBI's wire intercepts, we have proof she coordinated the contracts. She leaned in. Mr. Monroe, I need you to understand something. This case is no longer about one corrupt HOA president. We are looking at conspiracy, wire fraud, and potentially racketeering charges. This could go federal under RICO statutes. I exhaled slowly, the weight of it pressing against my chest, all because she tried to tow my car. Wells gave a thin smile. Arrogance makes people sloppy. She thought she was untouchable. She didn't count on you. That night, I drove through Willow Creek, taking in the rows of houses lit by porch lights. From the outside, nothing had changed. The kids still played. Sprinklers still hissed. Dogs still barked behind fences. But I knew better now. The community wasn't a neighborhood. It was the staging ground for a fraud machine, run by a woman in a pastel blazer who thought no one would dare challenge her. And now, because I had parked in the wrong spot on the wrong day, the FBI, the Attorney General's office, and half the state of Virginia were watching. Karen Jennings wanted me to move my car. Instead, I'd move the ground beneath her feet. And the fall was only beginning. The morning after the FBI confirmed Karen's ties to the wider network, my neighborhood no longer felt like the quiet place I'd once chosen for peace. Every driveway, every curtain twitch, every unfamiliar vehicle parked on the corner looked suspicious. I knew better than to ignore that feeling. Paranoia in my line of work was just another word for survival. By 9 a.m., the media blitz had begun. Local news stations ran headlines portraying Karen as a devoted HOA president targeted by overreaching federal authority. Interviews featured carefully selected neighbors praising her dedication to community standards. Watching from my living room, I almost laughed. These same people had whispered their frustrations about her for years. But fear and manipulation are powerful tools, and Karen wielded both with skill. The FBI anticipated her counterattack. That afternoon, I was summoned to the Richmond field office, where a conference room had been converted into what looked like a war room. Maps of counties, charts of financial flows, and photos of suspects covered the walls. At the center stood Special Agent Torres, her posture sharp, eyes blazing with purpose. "She's trying to own the narrative," Torres said, gesturing toward a television replaying Karen's interview. "So we're going to beat her at her own game." The plan was called Operation Spotlight. Instead of keeping everything under wraps, the Bureau decided to go public with select pieces of evidence. Financial records, fake contracts, recordings material sanitized enough not to jeopardize the case but damning enough to sway public opinion. "We're flipping the script," Torres explained. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant. If Karen wants a public fight, we'll give her one." I felt a mix of apprehension and admiration. This wasn't standard procedure. Federal investigations usually thrived in the shadows, but Karen's media manipulation had forced their hand. By Saturday morning, the evidence drop hit the news cycle. Charts showing Jennings Consulting siphoning money, audio clips of Karen threatening homeowners with bogus fines, visuals of HOA funds flowing into shell accounts. It was everywhere: morning news shows, online articles, even national outlets picking up the story. The effect was immediate. My phone lit up with texts from neighbors. I had no idea it was this bad. "We should have spoken up sooner." Even Mrs. Roberts called me in tears, relieved that people finally believed what she'd been saying for years. But Karen didn't fold. No, she doubled down. The very next day, she appeared on a rival news channel flanked by her attorney, accusing me and the FBI of harassment. "This is government overreach," she proclaimed, her voice steady, her pastel suit crisp as ever. "All I've ever done is protect our neighborhood. Now I'm being painted as a criminal because I dared to hold people accountable." It was masterful spin, and I knew some would believe it. That evening, as I returned from a briefing at the field office, I noticed a black sedan idling across from my house. Inside were 2 men, one pretending to scroll on his phone while the other stared directly at me. My stomach tightened. When I turned my car into the driveway, The sedan rolled slowly down the street and disappeared. Minutes later, a text arrived. "We warned you. This ends now." I forwarded it to Torres, who called back within seconds. "We're tracing it. Don't leave your house tonight. We're sending a surveillance team to sit outside." The weight of the situation pressed down harder than ever. This wasn't neighborhood bullying anymore. This was organized crime, and organized crime had a way of pushing back hard when cornered. 2 days later, the pushback escalated. Several witnesses who had agreed to cooperate with the state investigators suddenly recanted their statements. One neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, called me crying. They came to my door. She whispered, "Men in suits. They said I must have misunderstood the meetings, that Karen was just doing her job. They scared me. Elias, I can't do this." It was a textbook intimidation campaign, and it was working. Fear spread faster than facts. But the FBI had anticipated this too. Torres convened another strategy meeting. "We're accelerating the timeline," she announced. The media attention, the intimidation, the asset transfers, it's all pointing to a network in crisis. We move now, or we risk losing them. The plan was bold simultaneous raids across 3 states, executed at dawn. Arrest warrants had been secured for Karen, her husband, and at least 6 associates tied to the fraudulent consulting contracts. The night before the raids, I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like an intruder. My laptop glowed on the desk, the open file reminding me how far we'd come from a parking dispute to a federal takedown of a multi-million-dollar scheme. At 5 a.m., the call came. "It's done," Torres's voice said, clipped but triumphant. "We have them." News broke within hours. Helicopter footage showed FBI agents escorting Karen out of her house in handcuffs. Her pastel blazer replaced with a gray hoodie. Her husband was arrested at his county office, escorted past stunned coworkers. Boxes of documents, hard drives, and even shredded papers were hauled out as evidence. The neighborhood exploded in chatter. Some were shocked. Others said they always suspected. But no one could deny the truth now the Queen of Willow Creek had fallen. Still, even as I watched the footage, I knew better than to celebrate too soon. People with resources and networks don't go down quietly. Karen had played her part well, casting herself as a victim, spinning narratives, intimidating witnesses. And sure enough, by evening, her attorney held a press conference claiming the arrests were politically motivated, the evidence fabricated, and that Karen was the true victim of federal bullying. The battle wasn't over. It was only moving into a new arena, the courtroom. And as I turned off the television, one thought burned in my mind. Karen Jennings might be in handcuffs, but the machine she helped build wasn't dismantled yet. The hardest part was still to come. The morning of the arraignment, the courthouse steps looked like a movie set. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes aimed skyward. Reporters jostled for position behind metal barricades, microphones ready. Protesters held signs, some demanding justice, others insisting on Karen's innocence. It felt surreal, watching the spectacle unfold around what had started as one woman screaming at me over a parked car. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Karen entered, flanked by her attorneys, dressed not in her signature pastel, but in a charcoal gray suit, her hair pulled tightly back. She wore an expression carefully curated for the camera's part defiance, part martyrdom. Robert Jennings followed close behind, his face pale, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The prosecutor laid out the charges: wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and racketeering under the RICO statute. Each count carried years of potential prison time. When the clerk read embezzlement of over $2 million, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. Karen's attorney rose smoothly. "Your Honor, my client is a respected community leader. These charges are politically motivated and rely on testimony coerced under duress. The so-called evidence was obtained improperly, and we intend to prove that in court." I sat in the gallery, jaw tight. It was infuriating to hear them twist the truth, but I knew the evidence was overwhelming. The financial records, the recordings, the threatening texts, the shell companies, it all painted a picture no spin doctor could erase. The judge denied bail, citing risk of flight and ongoing witness intimidation. Karen's mask cracked for the first time, her jaw tightening, her eyes flashing as marshals led her away. For a fleeting moment, I saw the real woman behind the performance, the one who had bullied neighbors, fabricated laws, and thought herself untouchable. But victory was not without cost. In the days that followed, retaliation hit the neighborhood hard. Residents who had spoken out received anonymous phone calls at night. One family found their mailbox smashed. Another woke to find graffiti sprayed across their garage snitches. Fear returned like a storm cloud, and people began asking themselves if speaking up had been worth it. I struggled with the same question late at night, sitting alone in my study. Yes, Karen and Robert were behind bars. Yes, the FBI had dismantled much of their network, but the scars they'd left on Willow Creek and on other communities ran deep. Trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild overnight. Then came a surprising twist. Mrs. Roberts was elected interim HOA president in a special vote. Her first act was simple but symbolic. She opened the association's books to every homeowner. For the first time in years, transparency replaced secrecy. Residents packed the community center, poring over numbers that had always been hidden. You could almost feel the collective exhale, like people waking from a long, exhausting nightmare. A month later, I was invited to speak at that same community center. I stood before neighbors who had once watched me with suspicion, now looking at me with gratitude. I never intended to be in this position. I told them. I parked my car and ended up stumbling into a web of corruption. But the truth is, I didn't do this alone. Every one of you who came forward, who spoke the truth even when it was hard, you're the reason we're here today. Karen thrived on silence, and you broke it. Applause filled the hall. Mrs. Roberts wiped away tears. In that moment, I realized the real victory wasn't just Karen's downfall, it was the community reclaiming its voice. Still, the case stretched on. Months later, the federal trial concluded with guilty pleas. Karen received 18 years in prison. Robert got 12. 6 associates were sentenced for conspiracy and fraud. The restitution order totaled over $22 million, funds to be returned to the homeowners who had been cheated. For me, life took an unexpected turn. The Department of the Interior formally recognized my role in exposing the scheme. I was offered a position on a new federal task force dedicated to rooting out HOA corruption nationwide. It wasn't the career path I'd envisioned, but after everything I'd seen, how could I refuse 2 years later? I still think about that day Karen blocked my Honda Civic with her clipboard and empty threats. I think about how arrogance made her careless, how lies built on intimidation eventually collapsed under the weight of truth. And I think about the lesson etched into me and into every neighbor who lived through it. Power without accountability is just organized theft with nicer stationery. If there's one message I carry forward, it's this: document everything, know your rights, and never let fear silence you. Karen Jennings thought she could scare a neighborhood into submission. Instead, she awakened a movement for transparency that stretched far beyond Willow Creek. And as I stood watching children play in the same cul-de-sac where it all began, I felt certain of one thing: no pastel suit, no fabricated regulation, no self-proclaimed authority would ever again hold this community hostage. Justice had prevailed not because of one badge or one officer, but because ordinary people chose to speak, record, and resist. And that, I realized, was the real ending to this story. Sometimes, the battles that change lives don't begin with grand causes. They start in driveways, at mailboxes, or over something as simple as where you park your car. What happened in Willow Creek taught me, and should teach all of us, that silence empowers bullies, while truth dismantles them. If you've ever felt powerless in the face of unfair authority, remember your voice matters. Document what you see. Stand together with your neighbors. And don't be afraid to question those who claim power without proof. Karen's downfall wasn't just about fraud. It was about ordinary people discovering they could fight back. And so can you. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced someone abusing their authority? How did you handle it? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where ordinary moments explode into extraordinary battles. Together, we're building a community that refuses to be silenced.